We're here today with Philip Martin, a columnist and movie critic for the Arkansas Democrat-Gazette, who made his Tales from the South debut in June 2013. How did you originally get involved with Tales from the South?
Paula just called me up, or actually sent me an email and asked me to do it. I've been a fan of the program for 8 years, and I have a good friend who's done it several times, and I was aware of it, but I never really thought that what I did was translatable to that form. I mean, I don't know why, but you know, when I write, I don't generally write stories to be read out loud, and when I do music, I never thought of it. I'm not a performer, you know, I don't think of myself that way, so it was nice.
That was your first time?
Yeah, that was my first time I ever really did anything like that. Like I said, back in the 80s, in 70s and 80s, I played in bands and stuff, but I'd never done anything like that before. So that was, and I liked it. It was really interesting.
Describe the experience of getting up in front of an audience and telling your story.
One of the funny things is I think I probably, and without knowing how to do this, I didn't have any, there's no roadmap, no rule book that I knew of. So what I did was I just, you know, she asked me to do that, and I said, well, you know, they're asking me for this. I'm going to do something original for it. So I sat down and wrote this story, and I started out trying to write a story about rescued dogs, which is, you know, a big interest of mine. And somehow it evolved into what I was talking about, and I had written maybe a 3,000-word draft, and I didn't know how long she wanted. So I cut it down to maybe 2,000 words, and then I sat down to my, I have a little home recording studio. I sat down in my little home recording studio, and I just picked up the guitar while I was reading, and I put it on my iPad on one of these teleprompter apps, and I synced it up and let it run, and I read it, and I kind of liked the way it sounded, and I kind of liked the way it sounded with me just noodling on the guitar in the background. And I sent it to Paula, and she said, well, it's a little too long. I said, well, that's no problem. You know, so I cut it and basically had a little 3-act structure, about 1,500 words, and when I got on stage, my teleprompter just totally, you know, was running too fast. I couldn't see it, and so basically I did it by heart, you know. So it paid off that I rehearsed it a couple of times.
I noticed you played the guitar when you tell your story. How did that come about?
It was just totally, like I said, I didn't even think about it when I first sat down to read it. It was a way to keep my hands occupied. As you might tell, I move my hands around a lot, and when I'm talking to a class or lecturing or something like that, I tend to pace back and forth and wave my arms and stuff like this. And I figured, well, for this I need something to settle me down, and it was a good anchor. Plus, like I said, when I played back the rehearsals, it sounded all right, and I was just noodling around I'm just vamping on the C chord, I guess, is what I was doing, but just doing and just kind of letting it go as it went. And the night of the show, the only real trepidation I had was it wasn't like a musical performance where you have a monitor and you can hear yourself. I couldn't hear my own voice, and I couldn't really hear the guitar that well either. So I had kind of a horror that the guitar might have been out of tune. And I kept looking at my wife, but I couldn't quite see her because I was wearing reading glasses, because I know if it was out of tune, she would have been doing, you know, this horrible face, which she does. But I couldn't see her because I had my reading glasses, and I couldn't see the teleprompter, so I was just flying blind up there. But
what was the Tales from the South experience like?
I liked it. It was very gratifying. Number one, it was. I didn't think I would get emotional during the story because I'd done it a couple times, and I ended up getting a little emotional, but I didn't feel like I really screwed up too bad. You know, I dropped a couple words here and there. I added a couple of asides, and I'm not sure that they, you know, it may have been better if I'd have stuck to the script. But it seemed, and I got a really good feeling from the audience, a really good reaction. And the quiet parts were very quiet when I would stop, and you couldn't hear anything, and that gave me a little bit of confidence to go on. It was, to be honest, I mean, I'd love to do this sort of thing again. I mean, I've never combined things like that. I've read stories and I've played guitar, but I've never done it together, and I've never done it in that type of setting. So it was very interesting for me. It was really, really gratifying, too, at the end, when everybody stuck around and people came up to me at the end and nobody heckled me or yelled out anything during the thing. So that was great.
I would have assumed you'd done it before.
Oh, no. And I think that I think that I seemed more confident than I was, just because I've done a lot of public speaking. I've done a lot of things, and I know that, it's people really want you to do well. I mean, even if you stumble and you fumble around, people are really rooting for you to get through it. So I wasn't really afraid of the audience not being with me. I was just afraid of not doing a good job. And not doing a good job was not the worst thing that could happen, because, like I said, it was for me pretty much an experiment, and we didn't have a whole lot of lead time on it. I don't know when Paula called me. It was a couple weeks, so it was fine. But it was sort of like, okay, I'm coming in here, I'm going to do this, and we'll see how it goes.
The story you told back in June was very self-revelatory. Describe the experience of getting up in front of an audience and talking about something so personal.
Well, I think that the hardest thing to do when you're writing, and the hardest thing is to teach a young writer, is the importance of being honest. And I think that people can sense it if you're not. And I just told the story the way it happened, the way I felt it should be told, like I was telling it to my friends, and the way I talk to my friends is the way I told the story. I mean, I will make asides, and I will talk about, the University of Chicago and, the history of it. I just, kind of discursive sort of things, and I thought that was kind of a way to get into it. I didn't want to give myself anything too terribly tricky to read either. I mean, but it was, it's structured differently. It's very different than when I write a column. I write my writing is all based on rhythm. It really is. Most of it is. And if you can just be honest and competent, like write it well enough that I was thinking that I had an additional component there, in that you have some sort of emotional component with your voice and the way in your body language, and so you can get away with a little bit more than you can on the page. You can elide a word here or there. You can slide over something, and I'm sort of was discovering. I think if I were to do it again, I could do it better. I think that you obviously get better with practice. I think there's a danger that if you do the same story 50 times, it may get to be, kind of rote, and it may not be as good as experience, at least not for the storyteller.
You mentioned that you've been a fan of Tales from the South for a long time. What do you think it is that makes it so successful?
A lot of it's the voices. A lot of it is. I mean, I was listening to Sonny Payne's, I remember. And Sonny Payne, I don't know if he told a coherent story the whole time, but he had all these anecdotes about Robert Plant and Alison Krauss and people. And, it was just part of his personality comes through in the voice and in the way he sounds and in the vernacular, just the words he uses, word choice and stuff. And you get a fuller, different picture than if you had read something that Sonny Payne had written. I've always enjoyed hearing people interviewed and hearing people talk about themselves or about things that have happened to them, things they know about. And this is a way to get voices up there and have people experience that. I mean, one of my favorite things oral history is a wonderful thing. And it's wonderful not just because you're actually getting the information, it's because the way the information is delivered and the textures, the voice, the word choice, the way people express themselves. I think that's just as important as the stories.
The show is obviously called Tales from the South. Were you cognizant of trying to make it as Southern as you could when you wrote the story?
I almost went back and rewrote it, did another story, actually. I almost tossed it out because so much of my story was set in Chicago. But also is a story about homecoming. And it's a story about coming back to a place and being rescued. And part of being rescued was finding home, and I thought it was tangential enough. I mean, I thought I could get away with it, basically, and I guess I did. But I had some concerns about that because I thought maybe I should tell something that was more Southern. And there are stories I considered, I mean, I am a Southerner, and I've written a lot about Southernness, and I've of two minds about it. Number one, I think it's something that, we sometimes make too much of, and sometimes people who aren't from here make way too much of it. And I sort of cringe, when we give awards for best Southern this or best Southern, because I really don't. To call someone a Southern writer is really, it's almost like ghettoizing them. I know Richard Ford doesn't like it a bit. I don't mind it because I think it's, descriptive. And like I said during my story and during the Q&A, that I always feel more Southern when I'm in New York or someplace than when I'm here. Here I often feel like, an American, but when I get someplace where they have a different culture, then I'm more connected to my own. But yeah, I worried about it. I worried that when I sent it, especially when I sent the draft to Paul, that she might say, well, this is a fine story, but it's not Southern enough. And I'm glad she didn't say that, because I'm really glad I told that one.
What advice would you have for somebody who might want to take their story to Tales from the South?
I think that, number one, write it as good as you can. And I mean, really, one of the things I've always believed is that writing is really hard. It ought to be hard. It's, if you can do it in an hour, if you can come up with a story like this in an hour, you're not doing it right. And do what I did. I mean, I actually sat down and rehearsed this thing a little bit. Not as often as I maybe should have, but, every time I came up with a draft, I'd sit down and record myself doing it, which really helped, because if I hadn't done that, when the teleprompter app on my iPad started, and I mean, that's my fault. I was going too fast or too slow or whatever, but it was off track. But I would have had to stop and do this again. I mean, try to learn the story before you do it. And remember, it's a performance, because I approached it like I was, and I haven't done any acting for a long time, but I did in school. And so I just kind of decided I was going to get into a character, and my wife kind of noticed that my accent was a little bit more exaggerated than maybe I am now. I don't know. But I thought about where to pause. I thought about what lines to hit. I thought about how to, and I timed myself. I wanted to see if it fit in the right thing. So, do all those little things. But mainly, the biggest problem with most movies or TV shows or anything is usually the writing. Usually the writing is the last and least important thing in people's minds, and it's not. It's it's how you tell it as much as what you have to tell.
Do you think this is something people could do even if they're not a professional writer like you are?
They might even be better. I mean, I think that some of the best people to tell these stories, like I said, Sonny Payne was wonderful. I think some of the best people, you can't think too much about it. You have to sort of be yourself and be natural and be honest. And I think honesty, like I said, it's really tough, because the thing you want to do is you always want to protect yourself or engage in some self-aggrandizing sort of thing, and it's kind of hard to actually just be as human as you are, but I think that's the real important thing. That's the most important thing, and that's what people respond to.
Do you have anything else in the pipeline that you're thinking about doing for Tales?
Well, I hadn't thought about it, but like I said, I really enjoyed it, and I would come back anytime they asked me. And I have a lot of stories that I think are adaptable. I mean, I've got an advantage on a lot of people. I've been writing a newspaper column for nearly 30 years now, and most of those are little stories that either would or would not fit on this. But a lot of them, I could adapt. A lot of them, there's a lot of personal history. There's a lot of just interesting little things like the Edwin Cheney story. You know, I mean, I always like to look at the peripheral characters in history. You know, like Franz Kafka's dad. You know, is a great story. You know, and yeah, I would love to do it, and I would certainly think about doing it again. They've got an awful lot of great storytellers to get through before I get a second chance, I think. But, you know, I'm always open for it, and if they'll have me, I'll be there.